The USB drive hit the walnut conference table with a sharp, dry click, a small sound that was enough to silence the entire room. Every eye turned toward the woman who had just entered, Olivia Carter, investigative journalist for the Global Ledger. She wasn't invited, but she arrived at the exact moment that would change everything. At the head of the table sat Daniel Coleman, the BlackCeo of Nexora Systems. His shirt collar still held the faint crease of a sleepless night. 11 board members were preparing to vote him out of his position after the incident on an Aurora Pacific Airlines flight where he was forced out of a first-class seat. What seemed like a personal humiliation had turned into a corporate disaster, wiping 30% off Nexora's stock value. "I apologize for not following procedure," Olivia said, her tone steady but firm. "But what's in this USB could change everything you're about to decide today." The room froze. Eleanor Barnes, the silver-haired and composed chairwoman of the board, signaled for her assistant to plug the USB into the big screen. A soft blue glow from the projector washed over their faces, revealing a mix of confusion, disbelief, and restrained curiosity. The screen came alive with a series of internal emails, shadowy contracts, and cleverly disguised exchanges between Aurora Pacific executives. Olivia spoke slowly, guiding the room through a maze of deceit. The campaign to destroy Nexora's credibility wasn't a management failure. It was a calculated retaliation. Aurora Pacific funded a wave of smear articles after Daniel Coleman refused to stay silent about the discrimination he faced on that flight. No one moved. Even Robert King, the harshest critic of Daniel, set his pen down, his expression caught between shock and guilt. The afternoon light streaming through the Seattle skyline glinted off his face, half stunned, half ashamed. Olivia continued, her tone turning sharper. "These emails prove that certain Aurora Pacific executives used political influence to pressure partners into pulling their investments from Nexora. The goal was simple: make him bow or make him fall." Daniel lifted his gaze. His eyes didn't hold anger, only exhaustion mixed with a quiet wisdom that came from enduring too much. He could still hear that voice echoing in his memory, the white flight attendant saying, "You need to sit down. You don't belong in this section." That sentence had changed the course of his entire life. Eleanor folded her arms and fixed her gaze on Olivia. "Are you certain about this? If this information is fabricated, you'll be sued for defamation." Olivia smiled faintly. "I've verified every line, every IP address, every signature. This story will be published tomorrow morning. But I felt it was my duty to inform you first, so no one here makes a historic mistake." The words cut through the air like a blade. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Outside, the Seattle sky was thick with gray clouds, and the weak sunlight that slipped through the glass windows fell across Daniel's face, the face of a man vindicated, but not yet at peace. He knew the truth wouldn't just save him, it would burn down an entire system. Robert King was the first to speak. "My God, we blamed the victim." Eleanor nodded slowly, her voice low. "If all this is true, then we've been playing directly into Aurora Pacific's hand." Dr. Leonard Hayes, the oldest member of the board, placed a trembling but steady hand on the table. "The question isn't whether Daniel should keep fighting discrimination," he said. "It's whether Nexora, as a company, is willing to be bullied by those who uphold it." In that moment, all eyes turned to Daniel. He rose to his feet and drew a deep breath. "We can't talk about justice if we're afraid of power," he said. "If a tech company born from the resilience of people once overlooked can't stand up now, then who will?" His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed with the weight of conviction. Eleanor looked around the table. "We'll take another vote." Hands were raised this time, unanimously. Daniel closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He didn't smile because he knew today's victory wasn't an ending, but the beginning of something far greater. On the screen, the final line of an Aurora Pacific email appeared, the damning proof from within their own walls. "Make sure Coleman is removed before this story spreads. Someone like him must not have a seat at the table." Eleanor studied the words for a long moment before speaking quietly. Perhaps they forgot, sometimes, the table itself belongs to the one they tried to exclude. The fading sunlight poured through the glass, casting a golden edge around Daniel's face. In his eyes was not only relief, but a vow that this fight was no longer about saving one man, but about changing how the world sees a man like him. The news exploded across every headline overnight. At 6 a.m, the front page of the Global Ledger dominated social media with the title, "Aurora Pacific Airlines accused of discrimination and corporate sabotage against Nexera Systems, internal evidence shakes Wall Street." Olivia Carter's USB had become the spark for an unprecedented media firestorm. Within 2 hours, the hashtag turned first class, while black climbed to the top of Twitter, spreading across the globe like a wildfire through dry forest. In a high-rise apartment on the 25th floor in downtown Seattle, Daniel Coleman sat in silence before his laptop. The light from hundreds of posts, comments, and chaotic messages reflected on his face, a mixture of relief and heavy contemplation. "People are talking about you," his wife Lauren said softly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "But this time, not to judge you, to stand with you." He nodded, his voice still hoarse, as if every word had to pass through months of endurance. "Yes, but this fire, it's going to burn both sides, and I have to make sure it burns the right people. By 8 a.m. Nexera Systems' PR office had turned into a command center. Screens displayed graphs of engagement and shares rising exponentially. Alicia Grant, the legal advisor, reported, "We have an opportunity we've never had before. But we have to be careful. Aurora Pacific will strike back. I just heard they've hired Ferguson and Myers, the kind of law firm that rewrites truth with money." Daniel looked around the room, his voice calm but resonant. "We don't need to attack them. We just keep telling the truth over and over until no one can look away." By noon, national television broke into a special report. The reporter stood outside Aurora Pacific's headquarters in San Francisco, where hundreds of protesters held up signs reading, "Respect has no color." Faces of every race and background stood together. A young Asian student shouted into the camera, "I was kicked off a flight once for a so-called system error." Now I know it wasn't a technical glitch. It was systemic prejudice. That afternoon, the chain reaction began. Aurora Pacific Airlines stock plummeted 13%, erasing more than $4 billion in market value. Major investors flooded the company with calls demanding explanations. Breaking news alerts flashed everywhere Aurora Pacific, under federal investigation for discrimination and corporate manipulation. The Federal Transportation Commission demands urgent report. Inside Aurora's headquarters, glass walls reflected the pale faces of its executives. Michael Trent, the CEO, slammed his hand on the table. "We've handled dozens of crises, and now we're letting a tech CEO turn himself into a civil rights hero," the PR advisor replied nervously. "So this time it's not just a brand crisis. It's a moral one." Meanwhile, Olivia Carter struck again with a second wave a 5,000-word investigative piece exposing a chain of secret deals between Aurora Pacific and a group of conservative shareholders linked to real estate mogul Stephen Caldwell, who had been on that same flight. The opening lines of her article cut straight into their reputation. When power and prejudice shake hands, first-class seats become symbols of privilege, not merit. The story reached 20 million reads in just 24 hours. That evening, Nexora's offices overflowed with messages from international organizations. The Human Equity Alliance issued a statement of support for Daniel. 3 Hollywood stars shared Olivia's article with the caption, "Respect is not a privilege. It's a human right." In the boardroom, Alicia opened her tablet and read the latest update. Aurora Pacific's HR department has launched an internal investigation. Several employees have submitted resignations. Even the flight supervisor from that day, Monica Ruiz, has withdrawn her complaint and reached out to us. She wants to cooperate. Daniel closed his eyes gently, not out of joy but from deep emotion. He remembered the flight attendant's eyes that day, a mix of fear and arrogance. Now perhaps she finally understood. As night fell and the lights of Seattle glowed like artificial stars, Daniel stayed in his office. Outside, the rain fell each drop, tapping against the glass, blending with the constant ringing of phones. A call came through from Ethan Blake, CEO of Northbridge Capital, the investment fund that had once rejected Nexora after believing the rumors. Daniel Ethan's voice was gravelly, slow, and weighted. "I owe you an apology. I believed the wrong story. If you're still willing, I'd like to reopen our discussions." Daniel was silent for a moment. He remembered their last meeting, how this same man had avoided shaking his hand after reading a negative report. Now that same hand was reaching back. "Thank you, Ethan," Daniel replied softly. "But this time I don't need anyone's permission to exist. If you want to work together, do it for real value, not redemption." The other end of the line went quiet, a silence that spoke of respect. The next morning, Nexora's office buzzed with life. Journalists lined up outside, eager to interview the man who made an airline kneel. But Daniel simply told his team, "Don't celebrate. Truth is a weapon, and if we use it wrong, it will destroy us too." He stepped out onto the balcony, the morning wind sharp and cold against his face. Below, protesters still gathered holding handmade signs that read, "We stand with you, Daniel." Among them, a black boy, around 12, held his father's hand and shouted with the crowd, "Justice takes flight." Daniel looked down, his chest tightening. He knew that boy was a reflection of himself years ago, standing outside a world of privilege, dreaming of the day when justice would finally take flight. The Seattle sky that day remained gray, but in the chill of the wind, something had changed. A man once removed from a first-class seat had now made the entire world question who truly deserved to sit there. On Monday morning, the headquarters of Nexora Systems glowed like a fortress that had just survived an assault. The media called Daniel Coleman the man who made an empire kneel. But he didn't care about the title. He cared about one question only. If the truth has been revealed, has justice truly appeared? In his 34th floor office, the glass walls reflected the Seattle sunlight. Daniel stood gazing down at the bustling street below, where protesters still held signs reading, "Justice takes flight." The door swung open. Alicia Grant, his legal advisor and trusted ally, walked in, holding a thick folder. "You'll want to see this," she said, placing it on the table. The words on the cover read, "Aurora Pacific Airlines Settlement Proposal." Daniel flipped through the pages. A massive number appeared before him. $30 million, he read slowly, and a clause of absolute confidentiality. Alicia nodded. If you sign, they'll admit personal misconduct by staff members, and that's it. The case is closed. No one will ever mention that flight again. Daniel gave a faint, weary smile. 30 million for silence. They still think everything has a price. Alicia replied, her tone sharp as steel. Sometimes silence is the most expensive price of all. Just then, the office phone rang. It was Lauren, his wife, calling from home. You should turn on the news, she said urgently. Aurora just suspended their CEO, Michael Trent. On the wall-mounted TV, the anchor announced, under shareholder and public pressure, Aurora Pacific Airlines has confirmed that CEO Michael Trent is stepping down temporarily. Legal Director Rachel Nguyen will assume interim control. The room fell silent. Alicia exhaled softly. They're crumbling. But Daniel didn't share her relief. He sat down, clasped his hands, and lowered his head. No, he said quietly. They're just changing direction to survive. The storm is still there. That same day, a flood of emails poured into Nexora's inbox. Former clients, those who had once cancelled their contracts, were now returning. One financial firm from Boston wrote, "We apologize for our hasty decision. Nexora has demonstrated integrity and resilience beyond any report we've ever read." Alicia skimmed the messages, her eyes lighting up. You see, we're getting everything back. But Daniel shook his head. No, Alicia. It's not about getting it back. We must do better, prove that ethics aren't a PR strategy, but the foundation of survival. He turned toward the window. In the pale sunlight, his shadow stretched long across the floor, tall, still, and solemn, like an unspoken vow. That afternoon, Nexora received an unexpected visitor, Ethan Blake, CEO of Northbridge Capital, the investment fund that had once turned its back on them. He entered in a crisp black suit, his face filled with discomfort. Daniel Atton, I owe you an apology. Daniel stood and shook his hand. The handshake was cool but firm. We've all believed the wrong thing before, Ethan. What matters is what we do once we realize it. Ethan hesitated. I want to reopen negotiations. Northbridge is ready to invest $80 million into Nexora's AI project. This time, no strings attached. Alicia looked at Daniel, waiting for his response. But he simply said, We'll review it. But Ethan, I hope you understand. We don't need money born out of guilt. We need partners who believe. Ethan nodded in silence. In that moment, he knew the man before him was no longer someone asking for investment. He was the one rewriting the rules. Late that night, Daniel returned home. The kitchen smelled of coffee, and the TV hummed with a special report. On screen, journalist Olivia Carter was speaking. The community-led campaign, First Class for All, has surpassed 2 million signatures, calling for a complete reform of the airline industry. Human rights groups are demanding strict anti-discrimination regulations. Lauren looked at him, her smile glowing with pride. See, they're listening to you. Daniel sat beside her, his expression softening. No, they're listening to themselves, to the conscience that too many have ignored for too long. She took his hand. So what will you do now? He answered slowly. Keep going. Because there are still people without microphones, without hashtags, without lawyers. They need someone to break the silence for them. The next day, a message arrived from an unknown number. This is Monica Ruiz. I was the flight attendant who confronted you that day. I'd like to meet, not to justify myself, but to tell the truth. Daniel read the message, his eyes reflecting a deep, quiet thought. He knew this wouldn't just be an apology. It could be the door leading into the darkest corners of the system he had exposed. That evening, as the city sank beneath the golden glow of highway lights, Daniel stood on his balcony, watching the rain fall. Inside, the TV showed Aurora Pacific shareholders arguing in an emergency meeting. They were trying to rewrite the narrative, but for the first time, the public no longer believed them. Alicia stepped out beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Do you realize, Daniel, you're no longer the victim. You're the one leading the way." Daniel looked out at the horizon, the city lights flickering in his eyes like twin embers. "A leader must also be ready to walk through the dark," he said softly, "because justice never arrives on its own. It has to be brought." He turned, smiling a genuine, rare, and peaceful smile. Behind him, the TV screen displayed the latest headline, "Aurora Pacific begins negotiations with Daniel Coleman's representatives." The storm was calming, but everyone knew it was only the quiet before another wind began to rise. And this time, Daniel wouldn't just defend himself. He would change the entire sky. 6 weeks after the scandal, the media skies seemed to have quieted, but beneath the surface, another storm was forming, this time not to apologize, but to strike back. On Monday morning, the first news broadcast of the day left everyone stunned. Michael Trent, the former CEO of Aurora Pacific, reappeared on national television in a light grey suit, wearing a confident, unsettling smile. Aurora Pacific, he declared, has always been committed to treating every passenger fairly. "We regret that certain misunderstandings have been exploited for political and financial gain." Behind him, a massive board displayed the slogan, "Restoring Truth, Restoring Trust." With one sentence, he had erased months of struggle. In Nexora's office, Daniel Coleman stared silently at the screen. Alicia Grant slammed a folder onto the table. Unbelievable. They're denying everything. The settlement, the evidence. Lauren, his wife, stood behind him, fists clenched. "You have to respond. You can't let them rewrite history." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stared at his reflection in the television screen, the eyes of a man who once thought victory had come, now seeing only the outline of a new war. "No," he said softly. "They want me angry. I won't give them that. I'll give them the truth again. But this time it can't be twisted." Before he could plan his response, worse news arrived. Stephen Caldwell, the real estate magnate who had been favored on that flight, had filed a countersuit against Daniel for defamation and damage to reputation. The demand, $20 million in compensation. The Nexora boardroom fell into silence. Alicia reread the lawsuit, her voice heavy as lead. "They're accusing you of exploiting racial tension to manipulate public opinion and gain financially." Daniel gave a faint smile, but his eyes were cold. How fascinating. When they can't deny the truth, they turn justice into a crime. But the assault didn't stop there. An exclusive report appeared in the Business Tribune. The headline read, "Anonymous aviation expert reveals Coleman was the disruptive passenger who forced crew intervention." The subheading followed Coleman's actions may have been misunderstood. Alicia threw the paper down. "They're reconstructing the story, Daniel. They're trying to paint you as the aggressor." He remained silent, his eyes locked on the bold print, as if seeing the looming shadow of an entire system twisting itself to consume the truth. That night, Olivia Carter called, her voice tight with urgency. "Daniel, they're hunting my sources. Some of my witnesses are being silenced." Trevor, the flight attendant who leaked the documents, just posted a video retracting his statement. He says he misunderstood company policy. Daniel gripped the phone. They threatened him, didn't they? I can't confirm it, Olivia said. But he's scared. And I don't think they'll stop with him. The next day, Nexora convened a special emergency meeting. Cold light reflected off anxious faces around the table. Robert King, once Daniel's harshest critic, spoke up for the first time in his defense. We're being dragged into an endless legal war. Aurora knows we don't have the resources to fight forever. They want to wear us down. Eleanor Barnes, the board chairwoman, nodded. We need a long-term strategy. We need to find their weakness. Alicia added. Their only weakness is the truth, if we can find one more piece strong enough to make it undeniable. Daniel stayed quiet. Olivia's words echoed in his mind. Trevor was forced to withdraw his statement. He knew that if anyone could help him turn the tide, that person was still inside Aurora Pacific. Late that afternoon, as the meeting adjourned, Daniel stood alone before the window. Outside, Seattle rain fell like silver threads, slashing through the glow of streetlights. His phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I have information about Trent and Caldwell. Meet me in the basement parking level. B3 South Corner, 8 p.m. Confirmation code Trevor's USB. Alicia approached and saw the message. It could be a trap, Daniel. They might be setting you up. Maybe he said quietly, but if it's real, it could change everything. You can't go alone. I won't go alone, Daniel replied, his voice steady. But I'm going. 8 p.m. The underground parking lot beneath Nexora's tower was cold and silent, lit only by dim neon lights. The sound of footsteps echoed through the emptiness. Daniel walked toward the south corner, his heartbeat slow but firm. A shadow stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, a woman tall, wearing a long grey coat, her face tense. You're Daniel Coleman. Yes. And you are Denise Morgan, Executive Vice President of Aurora Pacific. She pulled a small USB drive from her coat pocket and placed it in his hand. This contains all the emails, financial records, and covert contracts between Michael Trent and Stephen Caldwell. 3 years of fraud, bribery, and abuse of power. They orchestrated your case, not for policy, but for profit. Daniel stood frozen. She continued, her voice, trembling but resolute. I can't watch them destroy this company any longer. But if they find out I betrayed them, I'll lose everything, maybe even my life. He looked at her, their eyes meeting for a fleeting moment. Two people from opposite sides, finding conscience in the middle of a war. I'll protect you, he said. And I promise the truth won't be buried again. Denise nodded. Be careful. They're watching your every move, and they're not just coming for you. As she walked away, Daniel remained in the shadows, gripping the USB tightly in his hand. Outside, the rain grew heavier, merging with the distant hum of engines. He knew now this was no longer a battle between one man and an airline. It had become a war between justice and a decaying empire of power. And this time, he wouldn't just defend, he would strike back. That night, Daniel barely slept. The USB drive given to him by Denise Morgan, the vice president of Aurora Pacific, who had risked everything to hand it over, sat neatly on the table, small but heavy as a bomb. Inside were emails, financial records, transfers, and recordings of secret meetings. Each file was a blade aimed directly at the top executives of Aurora, Michael Trent and Stephen Caldwell, the two men who had built an empire of corruption and systemic discrimination. Outside, the Seattle rain hadn't stopped. The sound of it felt like a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable confrontation. The next morning, Daniel and his legal team worked through the night, Alicia Grant, Olivia Carter, and a data security specialist. The Nexora office had turned into a digital battlefield, each keystroke striking like a drumbeat. Alicia slid her laptop toward Daniel. All evidence has been verified. The transactions between Trent and Caldwell are real. They used shell companies to launder money, and we have emails showing they discussed how to silence the Coleman case through a smear campaign. Daniel's eyes focused on the line, glowing on the screen. Keep Coleman under pressure. If necessary, let the public believe he's overreacting. Once he's exhausted, he'll silence himself. He whispered, "No, I won't be silent." It's time they listened. That afternoon, an emergency meeting of Nexora's board was called. The air in the room was thick, everyone aware that this day would decide everything, whether they would press forward or back down, fight or compromise. Eleanor Barnes, the chairwoman with silver hair and a calm but firm voice, began the session. Before us lies evidence of serious wrongdoing, but using it means Nexora will be standing directly against two of the most powerful men in aviation and real estate. The price could be tens of millions of dollars, perhaps even the company's future. Robert King, once skeptical of Daniel, was the first to speak. But if we stay silent, we're no different from them. I doubted you before, Daniel, but now I see this isn't about you anymore. Dr. Leonard Hayes, older but composed, glanced around the room. The question isn't whether Daniel should keep fighting. The question is whether we as a company have the courage to stand for the truth. The room fell still. Every breath sounded sharp. Daniel rose, placing his hand on the table, his eyes gleaming like steel. When I was kicked out of that first-class seat, I thought it was a personal matter. But what Ms. Morgan has revealed shows it's a system, one where money buys privilege, and anyone who resists gets crushed. He paused, looking each person in the eye. If Nexora gives in, then we're teaching the world that justice only matters when it's convenient. And I can't live with that lesson. Alicia spoke up firmly. We have a chance, not just to defend our integrity, but to change the rules of the game. If we release this evidence, it won't just be a discrimination case, it'll expose an inter-industry corruption scandal. The federal authorities will have to step in. Eleanor frowned. And if we fail, then at least, Daniel replied, we'll no longer be the ones who looked away. No one spoke after that. Only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, slow and heavy. Then suddenly the door opened. A young voice said, "I'm sorry, but may I say something?" All eyes turned. Maya Coleman. Daniel's 16-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, her eyes bright, her hands trembling. The assistant behind her tried to explain, but Eleanor gestured for the girl to continue. "I know this is an important meeting," Maya said, "but this is important to me too. I've seen my dad lose sleep. I've seen him doubted, and I've seen him keep going, even when no one believed in him. If he gives up today, I'll understand that dignity also has a price tag." The room went silent again. Maya took a step forward, her voice trembling slightly but clear. "I don't know much about business, but I know about fairness. If my dad accepts a compromise, it teaches me that standing up only matters when it doesn't threaten power. And that's the most dangerous thing adults can ever teach their children." Eleanor looked at the girl for a long moment, her eyes softening. "You're right. At your age, we often think justice is a luxury. But sometimes the young see more clearly than we do. Because they haven't yet learned how to compromise. Daniel looked at his daughter, pride and emotion swelling in his chest. She had spoken the truth that so many adults were too afraid to say aloud. Eleanor turned back to the board. We've heard enough. It's time to vote. 12 hands went up unanimous. The air seemed to break open, though no one cheered. They all knew this decision would draw them into the biggest battle of their lives. Eleanor concluded, her voice steady and resolute. We'll release the evidence, not for revenge, but to make things right. Nexora will be the voice of truth. Daniel turned to Maya and placed a hand on her shoulder. You taught me something today, Maya. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward, even when you are afraid. She smiled through tears. And you taught me that justice doesn't need to shout it, just needs to stand firm. That evening, as everyone left the room, Daniel remained by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The glow of sunset fell across the city, flickering in his eyes like a slow, steady flame. He knew after today there was no turning back. But he also knew, if no one dared to face the darkness, the light would never be seen. 2 days after the historic meeting, Nexora Systems was no longer a tech company on the defensive. It had become the spark of a public war against corruption and discrimination. The headquarters buzzed with chaos. Phones rang non-stop, emails poured in. In the glass conference room on the top floor, Daniel Coleman, Alicia Grant, and journalist Olivia Carter were preparing for a counter-strike they all understood would leave no way back. Here's the plan, Alicia said, spreading the folders across the table. First, we release the evidence to the press through Olivia. Second, we send all documents to the Federal Trade Commission, along with a formal complaint for financial disclosure violations. Third, we officially notify Aurora Pacific's board, except those with ties to Trent and Caldwell. Daniel nodded. We won't attack them with anger. We'll attack them with truth, the one thing they can't control. Olivia gave a faint, resolute smile. You're forgetting something, Daniel. When the truth has been twisted for too long, people fear it more than the lies. That afternoon, Olivia's exclusive investigation appeared on the front page of the Global Ledger, the network of corruption and discrimination inside Aurora Pacific, from power to reckoning. The opening paragraph sent shockwaves through the country. For the past 3 years, Aurora Pacific Airlines has not only favored white VIP passengers, but also operated a privilege for sale system created by CEO Michael Trent and businessman Stephen Caldwell. Those who opposed them were systematically removed. One of the first victims, Daniel Coleman, the BlackCeo of Nexora Systems. Within hours, the news spread across every major outlet. Hundreds of international networks shared it simultaneously. Financial columns called it the corporate scandal of the decade. By the next morning, Aurora Pacific stock had plunged 15%. Reporters flooded the airline's headquarters cameras, flashing while employees avoided lenses and security guards erected barriers. Shareholders panicked. An emergency meeting was called and stretched through the night. Meanwhile, Stephen Caldwell was suspended by his real estate partners. 2 major firms in Texas and Florida announced they were halting all joint projects until the matter is resolved. Another article exploded across social media. Leaked emails from the Morgan USB reveal secret dealings between Trent and Caldwell. America was stunned. In Seattle, Daniel met with Nexora's board. Trent and Caldwell will respond, said Eleanor Barnes, her voice calm but firm. The question is how. Daniel replied, they'll try to deny everything. But this time, the evidence isn't in one person's hands, it's in the hands of the public. Alicia added. "The Department of Justice has opened a preliminary investigation. They'll have to testify. And as for Aurora Pacific, they're panicking. I just received a call from Rachel Nguyen, their interim legal counsel." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What did she say?" "She asked if you'd agree to speak directly with their board." The next morning, Daniel walked into Aurora Pacific's headquarters in San Francisco, the same place that had once denied him a first-class seat, now welcoming him with every formality and respect. As he passed through the lobby, a black receptionist murmured softly, "We're proud of you." Daniel nodded, saying nothing. Inside, he felt a warmth mixed with bitterness, because something that should have always been normal was now seen as an act of courage. The doors to the main boardroom opened. 11 people in dark suits sat around the table. At the center was Eleanor Richardson, the new chairwoman of Aurora, a former federal judge with a stern face and steady eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice both courteous and grave. "We've reviewed the evidence. Now we want to hear from you. What is it you want from us?" Daniel looked around the room. The faces staring back at him were filled with fear, confusion, and caution. He took a slow breath. "I'm not here to demand money," he said. "I'm here to demand change." He opened his laptop and projected the Morgan files onto the screen. Emails directing staff to prioritize passengers by appearance, secret reports, tracking passenger relocation due to special requests and lists of bribery expenditures. "I used to think being kicked out of first class was the fault of a few people," Daniel said, his voice tightening. "Now I know it was policy. A policy built to make people who look like me always ask permission to belong." The room fell silent. No one moved. One board member whispered, "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just a PR crisis. It's corporate crime." Chairwoman Richardson looked around, then back at Daniel. "If we commit to a full investigation and structural reform, will you cooperate?" Daniel nodded. "I don't want to destroy Aurora Pacific. I want it to change, because if an airline that once embodied privilege can become a symbol of fairness, that's when justice is real." That afternoon, headlines broke across every news channel. Aurora Pacific holds emergency meeting to consider firing CEO Michael Trent and businessman Stephen Caldwell. The airline's stock dropped another 8%. But this time, people weren't talking about financial loss. They were talking about accountability. Late that night, Daniel returned home to Seattle. Lauren greeted him at the door with a gentle smile. "You did it," she whispered. "You made them listen." Daniel took her hand, exhausted, yet peaceful. "No," he said softly. "I just knocked. They were the ones who chose to open the door." He looked out the window. The Seattle rain still fell, but through the glass, each droplet caught the light, scattering into thousands of tiny reflections, like thousands of eyes watching and hoping. That morning, the air inside Aurora Pacific Airlines headquarters felt heavy, as if every wall could sense that something was about to collapse. The corridor leading to the 40th floor boardroom was silent except for the steady sound of Daniel Coleman's footsteps. He had walked through many halls of power before, but never with a heart this heavy. The door opened. Inside, the board members were already seated, waiting. At the center sat Eleanor Richardson, the new chairwoman, her gaze firm and voice calm. "Thank you for coming back, Mr. Coleman. We want to hear directly from you about what you believe must change for Aurora to survive." Daniel took his seat. He came without lawyers, without advisors, only a USB drive filled with evidence and an unshakable conviction. The light reflected off the polished wooden table as he plugged in the drive and opened a series of images, emails, wire transfers, internal reports. "I'm not here to retell my story," he said, his tone steady and deep. "I'm here to tell the story of hundreds of others, the passengers who were mistreated because they looked different, the employees forced into silence, and the people like Ms. Morgan who sacrificed their careers so the truth could be seen." On the screen appeared a line from an internal memo: "Priority passengers, senior business partners, VIP travelers, and those whose image aligns with the brand's target demographic." A man's voice murmured under his breath. "My God," Daniel continued. "You think this is just a PR issue? It's not. It's a structure of discrimination, dressed up in elegant language. And when I refused to bow, they chose to destroy my company to protect that system." He paused, scanning the faces around the table. "I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for change. And if Aurora wants to survive, you need it too." The room was thick with silence. One board member, an older man named Harold Quinn, leaned forward and asked, "And what in your view does change mean?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "It means ending backroom deals, removing those who use privilege to define human worth, creating an independent, transparent complaint system, eliminating every non-disclosure agreement used to silence victims, and publicly admitting that Aurora was wrong." A few people whispered among themselves. A dissenting voice rose. "You're asking for too much. You're trying to destroy the company's reputation." Daniel met his eyes calmly, but his gaze was sharp as steel. "No, I'm trying to save it. Reputation isn't protected by silence. It's earned by courage. Silence will always be exposed eventually." Chairwoman Richardson leaned back, fingers interlaced. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "If we agree to these changes, are you willing to help us rebuild Aurora's integrity?" Daniel nodded. "I am, but only if this isn't a performance. I've seen too many companies change their logo, their slogans, yet keep the same way of treating people." A long pause followed. Then the chairwoman said, "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. We'll hold an internal vote. But I believe today isn't just a turning point for Aurora. It's a turning point for this entire industry." Daniel rose and gave a slight bow. "I hope you choose the right side of history." That afternoon, the breaking news flashed across every screen. Aurora Pacific Airlines fires CEO Michael Trent and suspends businessman Stephen Caldwell. The board announces an independent investigation into the entire organization. The airline stock continued to fall, but this time people applauded. Human rights groups, news outlets, and millions online shared two hashtags: Aurora Reform and First Class for All. Outside Nexora's headquarters, Olivia Carter watched the scrolling headlines on a news ticker. She smiled and said quietly to a colleague, "Justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes when a whole system is forced to face itself." That evening, Daniel returned home. Lauren waited for him with a simple dinner pumpkin, soup-toasted bread, and the warm glow of a yellow lamp. He sat down silent for a long moment. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am," he said softly, smiling faintly. "Just lighter." Lauren took his hand. "I know you won't stop here." "No," Daniel replied, "because what I want isn't victory, it's transformation. If Aurora can change, then any company can. That's the real result." She looked at him, her eyes glistening in the candlelight. "I think tomorrow the sky will be different." He smiled. "We've spent a year clearing the clouds. Now it's time to see the light." The next morning, the national broadcast showed Aurora Pacific's leadership, bowing at a press conference. Chairwoman Richardson spoke to the world. We acknowledge the grave mistakes of our past. We are committed to change from the ground up, so that no one will ever feel they don't belong. Her words echoed across social media. In Nexora's office, Daniel watched the screen silently. Beside him, Alicia smiled. "You did it." Daniel shook his head. "No, we did it." Outside the window, sunlight broke through Seattle's sky after weeks of rain. For the first time, Daniel saw the sky as a reflection of his own journey, once darkened by storm clouds, now glowing with morning light. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. From this day on, no one would ever be forced out of their seat because of the color of their skin. 3 days after Aurora Pacific's historic press conference, America was still talking about it. Every major newspaper carried the same bold headline, "The first airline in history to admit systemic discrimination." For most of the world, the story was over. But for Daniel Coleman, it was only the aftermath of war. Late at night, the lights were still on inside Nexora's office. Outside, Seattle lay silent under fog, while inside the glow of laptop screens revealed tired faces across the room. Alicia Grant set down her coffee cup eyes, fixed on the partnership draft Aurora had just sent. "You'll want to see this," she said, slowly tension in her voice. They agreed to every condition, training independent audits removing NDAs, but they added one final line. "This agreement does not constitute an admission of intentional wrongdoing." Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of months of battle. "Still the same," he murmured. "They fear the word responsibility more than collapse." Olivia Carter, who had just flown in from New York, leaned back in her chair and let out a dry laugh. Justice is something they can accept until it threatens their interests. Daniel rose, walking toward the glass wall. The city lights shimmered below, but in his reflection, his eyes had turned dark. "We've won, but if I sign this, everything gets sealed away. No one will know what really happened. The people who were mistreated, they'll never hear an apology." Alicia looked at him, her voice low but steady. "So what will you do?" "I won't sign," Daniel said firmly. "Justice isn't bought with a signature. It's preserved through memory." The next morning, Aurora Pacific's headquarters was in uproar once again. Daniel and Nexora's legal team arrived carrying their official response. When Chairwoman Eleanor Richardson entered, the look in her eyes said she already knew. "You're rejecting the agreement," No, Daniel said quietly. "I'm rejecting forgetfulness." The room went still. Board member Harold Quinn, his voice weary, asked, "Do you realize how angry the shareholders will be?" "I do," Daniel replied, "but they should be angry for the right reason. Because one day, when you're wrong again, at least they'll know who once taught you how to admit it." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll revise it and I'll sign." In that instant, the entire room felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. When both sides signed what the media soon called the Coleman Accord, it was broadcast around the world. The agreement was made public. One Aurora Pacific admitted the existence of internal policies that fostered inequality. 2 all-frontline staff were required to complete unconscious bias and equitable treatment training. 3 all discrimination complaints would be handled by an independent review board overseen by the Department of Transportation. 4 all NDAs in discrimination cases were permanently abolished. 5 quarterly reports on reform progress and passenger feedback would be made public. No one could believe it, A global airline had dismantled its own traditional protections because one man had been moved out of his seat. But Daniel knew it wasn't just about him. It was for Denise Morgan, who had risked her career for Olivia Carter, who dared to publish the truth, and for the thousands who had never been given the chance to tell their stories. That evening, Nexora held a small celebration. Everyone wanted to raise a glass, but Daniel wasn't there. He sat alone on the rooftop, cold wind cutting through the night as he looked down at the glowing city. Lauren appeared behind him, draping a wool coat over his shoulders. "They're celebrating downstairs," she said softly. "I know." "And you're still not happy?" Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "When you know how many tears it took to make something right, joy doesn't come easily." Lauren sat beside him. "But you made people believe that change is possible." He turned to her. "No, they're the ones who made me believe that fighting is worth it." The next morning, Olivia sent him a new article. The title was simple: "One Seat, One Man, One Generation." In it, she wrote, "Daniel Coleman never sought revenge. He sought to restore the meaning of justice in a world that had grown used to buying it with money. Through his resolve, he forced an entire system to relearn respect." When he finished reading, Daniel smiled faintly, then closed his laptop and looked toward the sky. A plane from Aurora Pacific passed overhead, sunlight glinting off its metallic body. Beneath the fuselage, the new logo shone clearly: Equal Skies Initiative. That afternoon, his phone rang. It was Eleanor Richardson. "We'd like you to join our Community Advisory Council as honorary chair. You don't have to decide now." Daniel replied softly, "I don't need the title, but I'll serve if it means helping a child never go through what I did." "That's enough," Eleanor said. "Justice sometimes only needs that." That night, Daniel returned home. Maya was studying in the living room while Lauren brewed tea. He sat beside his daughter. "Do you remember when I told you that dignity can't be bought?" Maya nodded. "I remember. But now I think it can be shared." Daniel smiled, placing his hand over hers. "That's right. And today, you just saw it happen." Outside, a plane glided through the night sky, quiet equal, without privilege. A year had passed. Seattle glowed under the soft light of an autumn morning as Daniel Coleman walked into the international airport electronic ticket-in-hand destination, San Francisco, the flight operated by Aurora Pacific Airlines. The very airline that had stripped him of his dignity a year ago was now welcoming him back with genuine respect. "Welcome aboard again, Mr. Coleman," the flight attendant said with a sincere smile. Daniel returned it gently. "Thank you. It's a beautiful day to fly." When he sat down in seat 3, no one looked at him with suspicion. No one questioned his ticket. No one doubted whether he belonged there. It was a simple, ordinary silence. But for Daniel it carried the weight of an entire lifetime of struggle. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Mr. Coleman." He looked up. It was Monica Ruiz, the woman who had once threatened to remove him from that flight, now serving as Aurora's head of equality training. Her voice was calm. "The program is working. I'm teaching the core course, Equal Passengers. It exists because of you." Daniel nodded. "Thank you for not running from the past," Monica smiled softly. "I'm not running from it. I'm walking through it like you." On the screen in front of him, a new company video played Aurora Pacific, flying beyond bias. As the plane glided through layers of white cloud, Daniel opened his laptop. An email from the Equal Skies Foundation, the organization he had founded announced that their project supporting victims of discrimination in 3 countries had been officially approved. He smiled and typed his final line of reply: "Help them find their seats again, not through power, but through dignity." Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and clear, calm and free of shadows. And in that vastness, Daniel knew his journey wasn't over, but the world he was flying through today was no longer the same. One summer afternoon, golden sunlight bathed the new headquarters of the Equal Skies Foundation in Seattle. In the main hall, a photograph of Daniel Coleman, taken years ago in that first-class cabin, hung on the wall with a small inscription. Beneath it, 1 seat, 1 person, a reminder that dignity has no color. Daniel walked through the quiet corridor, where young staff members were discussing a new support program for victims of discrimination in airports, hotels, and schools. He listened as they spoke with the confidence of a generation that had never known fear in standing up for fairness. And he smiled the smile of someone who had finally seen true hope. In his office, his daughter Maya sat typing on her laptop, drafting the proposal for a campaign she was leading, called Equal Starts. "You know, Dad," she said, her voice both playful and proud, "this time I'm not telling your story. I'm telling the stories of those who are continuing it." Daniel looked at her and replied softly, "Then you've understood. Justice never ends with one person. It begins with the one who dares to say no." Lauren entered, carrying 2 cups of tea, setting them gently on the table. The sunset streamed through the window, wrapping them in a warm, golden light. Outside, the distant roar of an ascending plane blended with the sound of waves. Daniel gazed out through the glass and said quietly, "I used to think fairness was the destination. But the truth is, it's a journey, and everyone has the power to keep walking." Lauren placed her hand on his shoulder, and that journey began because you refused to leave your seat. He smiled. "No, you're mistaken. It began when the world realized that one person who refused to bow could make the entire sky change." The plane outside disappeared slowly into the clouds, leaving behind a long streak of light across the clear blue sky, like an exclamation mark, a final open-ended tribute to the journey of justice. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, Daniel Coleman's journey is not just the story of a man removed from a first-class seat, but a testament to something far deeper, that true justice doesn't live in a courtroom, but in the way we choose to treat others when no one is watching. He didn't win through anger, but through resolve and wisdom. He didn't fight back with power, but with truth. And it was that truth that made an entire system bow and change. If you believe that dignity requires no privilege, only courage, then like this video to help spread that message. Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us on this journey to uncover stories where ordinary people create extraordinary change. Leave a comment below with a phrase that reflects your belief, a reminder to all of us that fairness begins with the choice not to stay silent. Hold your dignity.